Why have you summoned me?
I wanted some help doing the dishes?
You have summoned me, the mighty Conqueror, to clean your house?
Just the kitchen, actually. I can handle the vacuuming.
I will trample your immortal soul for all time.
Does this sound familiar? You just need a little assistance for a couple of hours, and the demon you've conjured demands unreasonable payment? Here at Sinister Minutes, we've found a solution to your problem. Introducing Rent-A-Demon! Sinister Minutes handles the conjuration, the messy diagrams drawn in salt and blood, the candles, all the things you'd rather not do yourself. We also handle the negotiations, and we promise the price you have to pay will be eons less than anything you'd ever be able to contract for yourself. Need an enemy army wiped out? Need somebody to dust under the refrigerator? Either way, we've got you covered. Sinister Minutes, Rent-A-Demon service to the rescue! Sinister Minutes is not responsible for any bargains struck with demons outside the constraints of this contract. Got a minute or two? We have a way to make it not okay. Welcome to Sinister Minutes. I'm your host, writer and storyteller Kurt Homan. Next to me is the master of macabre musical musings, the maestro of mood, Tim Parker. Together, let us take you on a journey into the dark heart of disturbing. Sinister Minutes. It's not okay. Sinister Minutes features tales that include disturbing content. That's intentional because, like the podcast itself, the creators here at Sinister Minutes are really not okay. Now, having said that, realize that content featured on this podcast may include descriptions of some pretty horrific things at times. It is a dark fiction podcast, after all. So we hope that you are anticipating some degree of abuse and blood, of harm and death, of suicide, of sex, of injury, of mutilation, of pain, and certainly some profanity. Maybe a little bit of screaming, occasionally some threats, a bit of torture, a bit of victim blaming. And as always, at some point, we're sure that you're going to encounter some witches. Don't say we didn't warn you. Welcome to Sinister Minutes Season 2, Episode 4. As always, we're so grateful for you, our listeners, for your support, for letting us entertain you. If you're just joining us for the first time today, we encourage you to listen to the plethora of shows we've produced over the past year. Longtime listeners, why not go back in time and give some of those older shows another listen? You know you missed some juicy bits the first time through. Today's story is Blood on the Keys, the story of a guy who goes to some interesting lengths to follow his dreams. Have you ever wondered whether there was a demon inhabiting your computer? A ghost chasing your mouse? Gremlins in your keyboard? You will once we're done with you. As always, reach out and let us here at Sinister Minutes know how you're doing, what you like about us, and, okay, what you really think of us. Find us under Sinister Minutes on Blue Sky or YouTube or Facebook, or drop us an email, sinisterminutes@gmail.com. Do you have an original short story of your own? Something with a dark or sinister bent? Something you'd like to hear on a future Sinister Minutes episode? Go ahead and attach it to an email. Send it to sinisterminutes@gmail.com, and one of the demons in our server will visit you in the wee hours of the night. Sounds like fun, huh? After today's story, Tim's got an ode to an insidious mistress he'll be sharing. Because our favorite sorts of mistresses are alluring but harmful. Much like long-term listening to our podcast. Is it any wonder that we are not okay? Blood on the Keys, written and narrated by Kurt Homan. Some guys grow up dreaming about playing pro football. Some want to be rock stars or actors. Me, I always wanted to write. The bestseller fantasy, with the huge advances and crowds of followers, had been in my head as a kid, but now my aim was simple. Just finish a book good enough for some publisher to take a chance on it. Maybe even ship a few thousand copies. I'd submitted articles and short stories, and a few got picked up and published, but nobody was offering me more than coffee money. So I wrote in my spare minutes and lived in the steady paycheck, soul-sucking world of data analysis the rest of the time. Until that weekend. I'd had to work up to asking my wife Cody if she'd be willing to take a girls' weekend. Requesting alone time always felt selfish. I needn't have worried. She was as eager to get away with her friends for a few days of museums and sightseeing as I was to have the house to myself. A steady drizzle opened that chill November Saturday. I'd gotten all the chores done the night before, so with no distractions, I entered my study, booted up the computer, and switched on my writing playlist, a lot of instrumental jazz from the 50s. With a rough plot line worked out in my brain, I prepared to begin my masterpiece, certain the magic would flow. An hour later, I'd taken to typing out famous starting lines, looking for inspiration. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. No. Once upon a time, absolutely not. Call me Ishmael. More like call me poser. Before noon, I sought insight from the kitchen. The pizza box I'd left sitting on the counter the previous night revealed a single slice of cheese and pepperoni, slowly curling. I hate to waste food, so I grabbed it and a glass of milk to wash it down. Returning to my computer, though by then I thought it more a tormentor, I was determined to try again. The first bite provided no incentive, but the dry pizza crust made me choke, and I reached for the milk that I'd set on the shelf above the desk. So I wouldn't accidentally knock it over. And of course I did exactly that. Milk splashed across the desk in a great white wave, and the glass shattered. Forcing the desiccated pie down my throat through sheer will, I ran for a towel. I sopped the milk from the desk and turned the keyboard upside down to shake the droplets free. I hoped I wasn't too late, not wanting to have to hunt down a spare. Leaving it to drain, I dropped to my knees to clean the greater mess. Each shard of glass was dropped in the wastebasket until I thought I had them all. I wiped up the rest of the milk, anticipating the coming stench if I didn't. The distraction of cleaning, of course, annoyed me, but at the same time I felt relief in having escaped the endless blank screen, at least for a little while. Back at the desk, I gave the keyboard another shake, flipped it right side up, and eyes on the screen tested it out. Sure enough, my middle finger dragged across a tiny splinter lodged between K and L, and blood welled up from the gash. I pulled my hand to my mouth, but not before rose-red drops followed the snow-white milk onto the keys. inspiration struck. The problem was clear. My protagonist was all wrong. Ignoring the pain, the blood, the mess, my fingers flew across the keys, my typing skills inadequate for the flow of words. Sentences splashed across the screen like spilled milk, the story welling up inside and squeezing out like the drops of blood from my wounded finger. When I stopped and sat back in my chair, sunlight had replaced the gray skies outside. My fingers were numb and cramped. My neck and shoulders ached from hunching over the keyboard, and my eyes felt as though the lids had been taped open. I checked the time, shook my head, and looked again. Saturday afternoon was long gone. Sunday morning had arrived without my notice. I looked around in a daze, barely recognizing the space around me. After saving the file, I stumbled off and away in search of a bathroom, a drink of water, and a place to lie down. I was out cold when Cody returned home hours later and had to call out of work the next day. In fact, it was midweek before I made it back to the study. The keyboard was a smear of ugly, keys just glued in place. Disgusted, I pushed it to one side and opened the document just using the mouse. Whatever I'd gotten done, I figured I'd give it a quick read-through and then get down to revisions. It took several hours to read it all. The words on the screen were at once familiar and not. The memory of writing them felt like a dream recalled upon first awakening. Emotions poured through them, tears, laughter, anger, and by the time I finished, I felt both exhausted and longing for more. I shared it with Cody, and her reactions mirrored my own. She read it in one sitting that kept her up well past bedtime. The next day, before I could overthink it, I shipped the manuscript off to a small publisher I'd found. Not even a month later, I heard back, and a few months after that, Weight of the Storm started racking up sales. I got a rapid education in blurbs, cover designs, and royalties. My publisher talked me into doing a few signings, and each time I expected to be sitting alone in the back of a bookstore. But each time I was surprised at the size of the crowd. I could have stopped at that one book, but my publisher was eager for more, and besides, I had to try again. Prove to myself it hadn't been a fluke. Show the world I could follow up, and just maybe find a path toward giving up my day job. I agreed to a second book, to taking an advance, to writing my heart out again. And so, just 6 months later, Felonious Monk sending inspiration to my ears, I again faced the cold, empty screen, wondering if it had all been a dream. 3 days in, I'd come up with dozens of ideas for the new book and set each of them aside. I tried all the remedies for writer's block, screaming at trees, writing in longhand, even sitting outside in the cold rain. I grew aggravated with myself. Superstition looms hard when things look bleakest, and I wondered whether I should have kept that nasty old keyboard. Maybe if I still had that, I could write again. After a solid week of false starts and self-abuse, I was ready to hang it up and send back that nice check. Defeat loomed at every login, and in my dark mood I lashed out at Cody more than once. Wisely, she gave me space. Hell, I didn't want to be around me. Opening a ream of paper one day, yet another in a series of busy work tasks, I prepared to stuff it into the printer. I riffled it, and the edge of the paper slid across my knuckles, parting the skin like a razor. I shouted in frustration over the desertion of my muse and now the arrival of gremlins to make everything worse. As I thrust my finger into my mouth, I remembered the other event that had occurred on a gray, dismal Saturday. Superstition and a desire for inspiration from beyond led me to try it. I held my hand over the keyboard and squeezed out a few drops of blood. Perhaps it provided a sacrificial offering to gods, ancient or modern, a way to bring their attention to me. Maybe I had a particularly bloodthirsty muse. Hell, I'd have accepted that tiny monsters lived in my keyboard, demanding payment before getting to work. All I know is I started to write. The words came out, my fingers a blur as they swept across the keys, ideas and emotions flowing easily. As long as I kept reopening the cuts on my fingers, I'd found the secret. Cody told me later she found me on the couch, unresponsive and ghastly pale. I wasn't awake for the ambulance ride, and at the ER, she'd had to answer all their questions as best she could. They found me somewhat malnourished and dehydrated, but mostly just exhausted. Released the next day, I slipped into a few days of bed rest. When I finally got back into the study, I printed the manuscript up and handed it to Cody, hoping she didn't notice the stains at the edges of several of the pages. The first book had been an emotional roller coaster, up and down and through the loops. This new one? Something else entirely. Cody told me it was like she'd been transported away, held aloft among the stars, treated to a ride through the heavens on the wings of angels. My publisher agreed, and then so did the book-buying public. More signings got scheduled, and when inevitably somebody asked about inspiration, I'd think about the blood while telling them things like, "Oh, everything worthwhile comes from within." A new keyboard arrived in the mail shortly after the hospital stay, but I took a break from writing. I had to work myself up to it. Cody was supposed to leave right from work to go visit her sister that weekend, but she'd forgotten something and wound up coming home instead. I'd put my phone on D&D, and her coming into the room while I was working was a complete surprise. I was deep in the zone. The razor I used to open my fingers lay beside the keyboard, and blood splattered on the keys as fast as the words splashed on the page. Cody said something that I ignored, then left the study. On a roll, I kept going. Minutes passed, maybe hours. I was closing in on a climactic scene, fingers flying across the keys when she stuck her hand in front of my face. I slapped it away, the motion reminiscent of the return on an old manual typewriter I'd used as a kid. She reached over me again, this time trying to block my fingers from the keys, and I slapped harder, pushing her away with the force of the blow. That was when she yanked out the plug. I leapt up in a blind rage. I screamed at her. She screamed back, heart pounding madly, hands outstretched. I reached for her, ready to throttle her. Everything went silent. I awoke, feet tangled in the mess of cables behind the desk. It appeared I'd lost my footing, come down hard, and knocked myself out. I called out for her, but there was no response. I looked out the window, saw her car was gone. I knew she wouldn't be coming back anytime soon. Horrified at what I'd almost done, at what had come over me, I trashed the study, tearing books from shelves, scattering papers, tossing whatever I could pick up against the wall. My heart pounded a terrifying rhythm in my head. And then I collapsed again. Maybe it was the bump on the head, which felt like a bad hangover. Maybe the effort of writing. It had taken its toll on me each time. The loss of blood, certainly, but also the emotional draining. Maybe it was the knowledge that work was irretrievably gone, never to be recovered. The rational part of my brain kicked in, reminding me that autosave was turned on. I'd been ready to commit murder for no more than 15 minutes of lost work. There was no autosave on my marriage. Cody had seen something dark and twisted that scared the hell out of her. It scared the hell out of me, too. It would be an uphill struggle to get her back, but I was determined to try. First, though, I had to figure myself out. I could not, would not, put her in that danger again. I've always been the type to simmer, to let my anger work its way through, never expressing it. That goes for all my emotions. I keep them inside, away from the world. That rage-filled man who rose from behind the desk was not me, at least not the man I thought I was. I remained mystified by the method I'd adopted for writing. The man who wrote wonderful words that people loved to read was the same man who'd wanted to strangle the woman he loved. That man shared a body with me, but I didn't know what made him tick. What was the purpose of the blood? I'd been unwilling to dig deeper, fearful of killing the golden egg-laying goose. I kept my curiosity bottled up, along with everything else. Now I had to look for whatever had been driving me. Gods and monsters weren't real. There had to be some unsupernatural explanation. I needed that other self to emerge so I could study him. But if I cut myself, if I bled across the keys as I had for inspiration, that other personality would take over and I'd awaken some other day, not knowing anything more. If I sat down and started to type without bleeding, I might never finish a sentence. What I needed was a control, some way to open up, but just a little, a place from where I could see the bigger picture. This last time I'd had no deadline, no need to write. I'd simply been wondering what might happen if I began, and had gotten completely immersed in the work, lost in the personality of the writer. I needed to somehow stop before it got that far. It was a simple idea, one driven by what had happened and the time of day. The hallway light came on as it did every day at that time, and like that bulb had turned on directly over my head, an idea sprang forth. A crazy thought, something that I'd never think of doing under normal circumstances. From the front hall, I disconnected the timer and brought it with me into the study. It was a cheap model, the sort the drugstore sells for a few bucks, but it would work. After plugging everything in, I sat down to write. The small cuts in my fingers were easy to reopen with the razor, but they hurt like hell. As I began to type, the blood welled up and flowed between already sticky keys. Blood and words flowed together again, and there were a fair number of pages worth when the computer shut down after 30 minutes. I was angry, but not so rage-filled as before. Sadness at having lost work next swirled around me, but then I began to laugh at bloody fingers and a computer without power. The timer had done its job, allowing me to open myself to the writer, but then regain control. Eventually, Cody came back. It wasn't after the first time I called, more like the 10th. I could tell she was still scared of me, and I couldn't blame her. I was scared of me too. Couples counseling wasn't what I'd always feared it would be, and our lives got a little easier as we worked things through. It helped that in that month she was away, I'd thought a lot about my life, where it had gone, what I'd accomplished, what I regretted. I'd thought about our relationship, both the loving aspects and the exasperating ones. In that time apart, I worked on myself a lot and got things pretty much under control. I'd given up trying to make sense of it. I don't think that's ever happening, but I have learned how to manage it. A little bit of blood, once in a while, is all I give it now. It takes longer to finish a book, but it's worth it, both in terms of my physical health and my home life. Maybe at some point I'll be able to stop sacrificing it all, but I'm not rushing things. Now I always let Cody know when I'm writing, and she gives me a wide berth. The most recent book is selling well. Not quite as well as the first two, but my memory of writing it is much sharper. Now when somebody at a book signing quotes my own words back at me, I'm not so caught out like a deer in the headlights. In celebration of the latest royalty check, Cody and I went out for a night of wine and jazz. The band at the club was hot, carrying the crowd up and down with their music, and a couple of times I even felt tears welling up, moved in ways I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. At the end of the show, when the house lights came up and the crowd began to thin, I started toward the stage. Cody probably assumed I wanted to greet the band, but that wasn't my intent. It had been difficult to tell from where we'd been sitting, but became clearer closer up. I wasn't alone. Not a freak, after all. See, there wasn't much, but I knew that telltale stain when I saw it, just like at home. There at the piano, unmistakable, was blood on the keys. Insidious Mistress, composed and performed by Tim Parker. Sinister Minutes is presented by Kurt Homan and Tim Parker. The musical score was composed and performed by Tim Parker. Our production team consists of Kurt Homan and Tim Parker. On behalf of everyone here at the Sinister Minutes podcast, namely Kurt Homan and Tim Parker, we thank you for listening, for joining us as we explore all the ways in which we are not okay. This audio program is copyright by Kurt Homan and Tim Parker under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.